Okay, is it ready to start? Yes. Okay. My submission is to have fluoride stopped, and I want to talk to that today. First of all, a little bit of background. My background is in academia. I've spent considerable time studying overseas. I have a Master of Arts in Psychology and Philosophy, a PhD in Philosophy, and I have a Master of Science in Neuroscience. So I have both an empirical, experimental background and a philosophical, theoretical background. Since 1987, I've been teaching at the University of Waikato in the Sociology Department, running the Sociology Department, and my area of expertise, one of them, is in the area of health and illness, looking at the sociology of health and illness, and looking at, in particular, contemporary issues. And one of the contemporary issues that I look at is water fluoridation. It's an enormous issue, and it's an enormous issue not in this country. I've given papers at various conferences on this, so I have quite a background in this area. Just a little bit of background. So to get right into it, my 10 minutes runs out, why is fluoridation such an issue? Well, in New Zealand, fluoridation is one of the Ministry of Health's health objective, and all city councils in New Zealand are being encouraged to fluoridate their water supplies. All those employed by the New Zealand Ministry of Health must promote the government's health objectives. That includes the Waikato District Health Board. They are therefore required to promote fluoridation, which would make it very difficult for them to say anything about it that was negative, because they would then be acting against their own contract. So that's one of the reasons why I think we get parroted from the from the Waikato District Health Board, the same line that the Ministry of Health has been pushing for a long time. That is that water fluoridation is entirely safe, and it's very effective at dealing with decay. But given that this is being pushed in New Zealand, there's considerable local opposition to fluoridation. I want to look at some of the issues as to why that's the case. How do we explain popular resistance to a measure that experts attest was highly beneficial and without any known risks? Since the 1950s, the fluoridation of public water supplies has been one of the most widely debated public health issues in the English-speaking developed world. So it's not just here that we're having this problem. And there's also much discussion about the science behind fluoridation and about scientists. For example, a recent survey in New Zealand showed that a significant proportion of the public distrust scientists. It found that 86% of people believe that it is important to have some scientists who are not linked to business interests, and 83% believe it is important to have some scientists who are not linked to government. Unfortunately, very hard to find scientists to fall into the categories that are outside those two. And it's becoming harder and harder as the research monies become more and more linked to business and enterprise and government. The science that claims to have demonstrated that effectiveness of fluoridation in the absence of any health problems is not of high quality. Many of the key experiments used to justify fluoridation are compromised, corrupted, or rigged. They start with a conclusion and then work the data to satisfy that conclusion. And this doesn't happen just in the fluoridation area, it happens in lots of other areas. I want to give you two examples. One of them is Trendley Dean, who he's often considered to be the father of fluoridation. In America, in 1939, he studied 345 communities in Texas and found that naturally high concentrations in the water correlated with high incidence of fluorosis in teeth, but also that where the level of fluoride was 1 part per million, there was a low incidence of dental cavities. 18 years later, in 1957, Dean admitted under oath that his data was invalid. He had discarded 272 locations that did not support his claims. This selective use of data to support a prior conclusion is very common in the area of fluoride research. It's also very hard to get the data, the complete set of data on these experiments. Second example, more at home, the Hastings Project in 1953 was the first city outside the United States to run a fluoridation campaign, and they took Napier as the control, both having very similar water supplies, and they measured the decayed, missing and filled teeth before and after the experiment, and they found that there was a big drop in the amount of decayed teeth in Hastings rather after the fluoridation had occurred. What they didn't include in that experiment was the fact that they had changed the criteria for judging decayed, missing and filled teeth during that experiment, so that at the end of the experiment they measured less decay by changing the criteria of what counted as a decayed tooth. They therefore had the result irrespective of the fluoridation, and this was never recorded in any of the published versions of this particular experiment. It was only found out much later by Dr. Calhoun, Auckland Head of Health, who got through the Official Information Act all the detail. This is another example of a corrupted science being used then to promote fluoridation in New Zealand. There's a lot more I could say about that, but I'm moving right along. Has science shown fluoride to be safe? According to the New Zealand Ministry of Health, they say, quote, "There is no proven evidence that fluoride at recommended levels in water supplies causes any negative health effects." I find that an absolutely astounding thing to say, given the hundreds of peer-reviewed scientific articles that have been published showing the many negative health effects of drinking fluoridated water. There's an international society for fluoride research that's been running since 1968, started by Dr. Walbot. They publish a journal called Fluoride, which deals solely with fluoride and its effects on humans. And it's been going since 1968, it's still going today. It has many peer-reviewed scientific articles showing the negative effects of fluoride on human beings. How can the Ministry of Health not know that? And that brings us to one of the issues about science and about the way it's bureaucratically organised. If you don't read any articles that are critical of your approach, you're never going to find out the full detail on it. Right. The economic and political issues. Fluoridation is strongly supported by those companies producing fluoride, by sugar companies, aluminium companies, pharmaceutical producers, nuclear industries, by government and by dental associations. Therefore, there is a vested interest in maintaining this fluoridation process. But as more and more evidence accumulates about the negative effects of fluoride on human beings, then we will start to see a change in this centre. Structural conditions such as who is funding the research, scientific closure, corporate gain and politically advantageous solutions means that it will not be until the dangers of fluoride are undeniable that action will be taken. I argue in this that we are at that point today. I would like to stop now and ask if there are any questions.
Yes, Roger.
Could you email me, please? You talk about the negative health effects due to fluoride drinking water, and there is research and peer-reviewed. Could you just let me know those papers? Because we have to get questions together at the end of this to ask people.
Yep.
And I would just like that information. So
where did the information come from?
Yeah, you're saying that there's many, you did mention there was many peer-reviewed papers saying that fluoride was negative health issues due to consuming fluoride water. And you said there's many papers on that peer-reviewed.
Certainly. In the appendix to my paper, I put in a paper from Paul Connett in the appendix, which contains 50 reasons for opposing fluoride. There is a copious list on that document at the end of experiments talking about the problems of fluoridated water and the health effects that it has.
Are they peer-reviewed? Sorry to interrupt.
Yes, peer-reviewed.
Peer-reviewed, okay.
I went to a conference and gave a paper down at Victoria University a few years ago on fluoride, and I took down with me 800 peer-reviewed articles. And I got a question from the then Professor of Sociology, Peter Davis, who's ex-Prime Minister's husband. And I said this, and he said, "You can't say that." He said, "Well, what's your evidence?" And I said, "Here are 800 peer-reviewed articles criticising fluoride." He couldn't say anything. But these are, when the International Society of Fluoridation Research had a conference, international conference in Wellington, nobody from the Ministry of Health went to it. This is the sort of closure we're getting from government. So the public is sidelined, and the dominant authority can do this sort of thing and continue to come up with these statements about that there is no health effects from fluoride. 1% per
1 part per
yeah,
million.
Just councillors, it is at the end of submission 1692. It's a Paul Connett paper, and it's got all the academic citations at the end. Councillor Boss.
Following on from Roger, it seems as if the fluoride or anti-fluoride lobbying group can't get a research institute at the highest level that people can relate to or respect in the world. Because if they did, it would blow away a lot of arguments. So what group or what organisation could you go to where they would be recognised by the rest of society? That's where I think the problem lies.
One of the problems with what you're saying is that the dominant approach that fluoride is good is being financed largely by government in America and here. It's been financed by industries which have a vested interest in promoting fluoridation because it's a way of getting rid of a highly toxic substance. It takes the heat off the government for not dealing with decayed teeth, because it can say I'm dealing with decayed teeth and everybody in society because we're putting fluoride in the water. That takes the heat off the government from the real causes and drivers of decay, which are sugar, poverty, bad food, and lack of education, access to medical and dental treatments. That's well known. So this is an easy fix for the government. It doesn't have to deal with poverty, it doesn't have to deal with these issues. What it deals with is water fluoridation for everybody. The other thing too is that research that's done by people at the highest level, if it's critical of fluoride, those people then get pilloried, sacked. If you want a detail of that, Chris Bryson's book, The Fluoride Deception, goes through case by case, showing in America how people, very, very top level scientists, got kicked out of their institutes, funding taken away, ostracised and so on, by criticising fluoride. The power of that lobby of industries is so immense. They control a lot of the editorships of scientific journals, so that if you submit an article that's critical of fluoride to a journal, it won't even get past the editor to the peer reviewers. It's excluded.
Thank you.
Right, any other questions, councillors? No? Look, thanks very much for coming along
Okay.
and doing your presentation. Really helpful.
Thank you.
Right, so that's the last speaker for today. Now, we're now adjourned until Tuesday next week, back here, 9 o'clock, and that's our final day of hearing submissions, and we'll be having the summing up from both the Ministry of Health and DHB on the one side and the fluoride free on the other side, and I think those will be taking place just after lunch, won't they? Yes, so for members of the public, the summings up for each of the larger groups will be after lunch on next Tuesday. Right, so thank you very much. Jacob.